so much for joining us. Welcome, welcome. Basically, formally familiar people from out of town too. So I'll just ask folks to keep their Okay. Should find a better way of stopping that music, like just doing a slow fade out like a DJ. So yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Fiona Wright, and I'm the Academic and Public Program Specialist at the Carleton University Art Gallery. I'm so happy to welcome you to this virtual artist and curator walkthrough of Drawing on Our History. So though we are gathering in virtual space, I want to acknowledge that QAG, like the Carleton campus and the city of Ottawa, are located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. I'm grateful to be living and working as a guest on, as Jay Ojig reminds us, what is, what has been, and what will always be Anishinaabe Aki. So no matter where we are on Turtle Island or elsewhere in the world, we each have our own way of reflecting on and reckoning with the responsibilities to and relationships we have with this land. I hope, though, that it always includes public acknowledgement and gratitude towards the traditional and ongoing custodians, and finding ways of supporting their work, knowledge, and rights. Drawing on Our History celebrates Carleton University Art Gallery's 30th anniversary. The exhibition features the work of Sharon Norwood, invited by Kosisotchukwe Nebe, Kablusiak, invited by Heather Igloliorte, Jagdeep Raina, invited by Anna Khimasia, Nalaxis, invited by Alexandra Senio Nawagabo, Marigold Santos, invited by Alice Ming Wai Jim, Jay Ojig, invited by Daniel Printup, Melanie Myers, invited by Heather Anderson, and Gail Uyagaki Kabluna, invited by Sandra Dick. So if you're in town, I want to encourage all of you to visit the exhibition in person if you haven't already. It's on view until May 7th, which is not that far away. And so for this event, I'm so pleased to welcome 6 of the artists and curators: Marigold Santos, Kablusiak, Jagdeep Raina, Alice Ming Wai Jim, and Heather Igloliorte. So in terms of what to expect from this virtual walkthrough, I'll introduce each artist and curator pair with short bios, and then they'll have about 15 minutes for a conversation. I'll show installation photographs of their work in the exhibition while they're talking. And you're welcome to leave your camera on, though I will mute you unless you mute yourself. And I'll be spotlighting the artists and curators. And we've saved some time at the end of the Q&A. So you can either raise your hand to ask it in person or ask in the chat box below. So without further ado, we will start with Marigold and Alice. So I'm just going to pin you both. Okay, so Marigold Santos was born in the Philippines and immigrated with her family to Canada in 1988. She currently lives in Calgary. Her work explores selfhood and identity that embraces multiplicity, fragmentation, and empowerment, and as informed by experiences of movement and migration. So welcome, Marigold. Thanks for being here. And Alice Ming Wai Jim is professor and Concordia University Research Chair in Ethnocultural Art Histories. She is co-editor of the journal Asian Diasporic Visual Cultures and the Americas, Brill with Concordia and NYU. So welcome, Alice, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Fiona. And thank you all for joining us. I am calling in from Jojag in Montreal this evening. And I also want to thank Sandra and Heather for inviting me to be part of this opportunity for this special anniversary show to finally work with Marigold Santos, whose work, Marigold's, I have been a big fan of your work for a very long time. And so I'm so happy to be able to engage with your work and have also this moment just to continue our conversations about your work with our guests tonight. And so I thought I just would set it up for folks and to say that the works that you see at Carleton University Art Gallery is just a selection, a small selection of a wide range of work that Marigold you've done over the years in many media and in lots of media. And so we really chose ones that had the resonance with the theme of drawing on our history. And so I thought we could start with the question about this very special figure in your practice from way back when. And I know when we talked about it, we were thinking how important it was to show, even in this small selection, different facets of this figure that in a way has grown and transformed and been with you through your many years of practicing as an artist. So maybe you could speak a little bit about what this figure is.
For sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marigold. Thank you, Alice, for your question. I just want to let everyone know that I'm presenting to you from Treaty 7 territory in Mohkinstsis, otherwise known as Calgary. The figure that Alice is referring to in my work is a folkloric figure in Philippine folklore called an aswang. And it's a hybrid of many different things. It's a shapeshifter. It's kind of known to be different figures depending on who's telling the story and where. But for me, I really latched onto this like kind of this visceral eater, shapeshifter monster creature. And over the years, through research and through understanding sort of the foundations of the folklore, have come to realize that it was a really great way for me to make metaphors with the diasporic experience. So the figure itself divides in half. It's a multiple character. So I wanted to use that multiplicity in itself to represent this idea of fragmentation of self and multiplicity of self from a diasporic experience perspective. So yeah, it really populates most of the figures in my work from, like the paintings, the drawings, even some of the plant life in my works can be kind of known, or I sort of name them as aswang, because no matter what, they're all kind of fragmented versions of something. And so I kind of use that as like a big umbrella term for the figures and the imagery in my work.
Mm-hmm. And this figure is a feminine figure who has been appears in very scary forms, but has also you've been playing with how it refashions itself. So sometimes it's all in a shroud, under a shroud, but then it's in a hat. And then a very wonderful piece where there's three of the aswang and they're dancing, and one of them has a very full belly, and we wanted to include that for a special moment. So there's some kind of relationship also with this figure and your own experiences of transformation. There was also a link to shamanism that was very important, and the empowerment of the female figure. And I thought maybe you could speak to a bit about if there was a feminist perspective that could be read into the figure and your use of it too.
For sure. Because my work really has a lot to do with my heritage and my ancestry, and sort of me diving back into this motherland that is sort of untouchable for me as a person that doesn't live in the motherland but was born there. It's really important for me to kind of like learn from my culture and look critically at like the history of my culture. And so the Philippines was a nation that was colonized, has a history of colonial violence as well, and it was colonized by Spain. And so before it was colonized, in the indigenous Filipinos had tenets of society. One of them happened to be the sort of shaman, medicine, healer, person who was able to tap into the other world and was a storyteller and midwife. And that person was predominantly a woman, and they were called babaylan. And so the Aswang mythology, it's a very long story, but the Aswang mythology essentially comes from the demonization and the villainization of these very important cultural figures that were attempted to be wiped out in an effort to missionize through the colonization of the Philippines back then. So it's important for me to sort of acknowledge that history and where that mythology comes from, because, you know, for me, it really talks, it's a way for me to decolonize, and it's a way for me to understand sort of the problematic parts of the history of where I come from and my ancestry, and then like where to move forward from there.
Mm-hmm. And so there's sort of, we follow this figure through the works, and we do get to see a few examples of your more recent work, and that involves tattoos. And in fact, that's what really got me excited in terms of so many different ways that you are playing with drawing. And when I saw the tattoos and I learned that you were engaging in this practice more recently, I was thrilled, because I said that's another form of drawing. And so why don't you just tell us about your recent direction here, how it started?
Yeah, actually. Yeah, sorry, Alice. Some of the pieces in the work really directly talk about this tattooing practice, or in the exhibition, sorry. There's 3 very large drawings that are on the wall in the exhibition, and they are vinyl cutouts that are applied directly to the wall. Here they are in the slideshow. They're very tall. These ones I think are like 12 feet and some. And they started off as just small drawings and iterations of actual tattoos that I've done on people. And so for me, like the tattoo practice is really nurtured my bigger practice. And even though it's a part of my practice, it works in terms of like feeding my creative process and allowing community to be a part of my process, because I invite people to be part of my studio, and we have sort of like a reciprocal exchange when we do the tattoo process. So some other pieces in the show are drawings, ink on paper. Those are like what we call tattoo flash. So they're like fragments of pieces of my paintings. You know, there's symbols there that come from a bigger painting that I take away, or they're little fragments here, and then they become bigger paintings when I make them into paintings. And they're also available for people over the years to have selected and have them be tattooed on their bodies. So it's been a really special process for me, and I'm happy to be doing that as part of my practice.
Mm-hmm. And it also has a special relationship to your own ancestry, right? So that you don't have a tattoo parlor where you're open for business to just anyone, right? It is something that you were explaining that is it's important to whole community as part of that practice. So I thought that was really an important part of it, because you were transferring culture through the tattoo practice, and then through this sort of work on skin, right? So that's Oh, I just thought of another question. So we have a few questions, but now I just thought of another one, which is the ways in which the surface, the skin, the textures, the materialities, and these kinds of knots and woven parts. They're also a very familiar motif in your work. So with the braids but also with the drawings on the hands as well. Could you talk a little bit about how those are related to surface textures, or this one especially?
Yeah. Well, textures is part of my visual language. And I won't go too much into detail, but I will sort of summarize it in that textures for me are a way for me to embed this kind of symbolism into my work. And so you might see it in a drawing like this, where this is pastel and charcoal on paper. You might see it in the detail of the painting, where the figure's hand is very much like made in woven braided material. You might see it in the way that I maybe draw hair on figures. You sort of see it a lot in my work. And symbolically for me, whenever I create woven elements, it's a way for me to talk about this idea of fragmentation and coming together and coming apart. Specifically, that anything that is sort of made in this way can unravel and come apart, but in the same way, it can come together and sometimes in its second iteration become stronger through repair. So it's a way for me to really talk about resilience and adversity and sort of reconfiguration and recreation when it comes down to this idea of self and empowerment, which is really at the root of what my work is about. I talk about diaspora, I talk about selfhood, and, these things are informed by my own personal experience. And I sort of put them in my work in ambiguous ways that can be, little clues into my heritage and into, maybe my own experience, but it's enough to be also, it's ambiguous enough as well for people to embed their own readings into it. And then when I reveal that, oh yeah, this is kind of like symbolically what it means for me, it's really amazing how they reveal like how they connected to it in very similar ways and in their own similar experiences. So that's kind of what it symbolizes in my work. And mainly you'll see this woven texture or braided texture a lot too in the landscape of my childhood and in my heritage. So it's a pattern that I often see as well, but then I reconfigure it and abstract it. So it's not a direct visual link to that, but people of like Philippine heritage definitely can clue into some of the things that I embed in my work. There's some, iconic symbols that's in the flash or it's in the paintings, whether it's the fauna, the fruit of my heritage, the textures, the patterns, all of that is a way for me to kind of also visually communicate my concepts that I'm interested in and what my thoughts are concerned of.
Yeah, I think the plants. So one of my students who came with us on a bus trip to see the exhibition the week after the opening, they had a question. They were very excited about getting a tattoo from you, by the way. So you probably know who that is, but they were also interested in the specific symbolism of these designs, right? And you think of plant life and how they speak to diaspora in their spores and the way that they grow. There's such a nice relationship with diasporic kind of the conditions or subjectivity in there so much. But so maybe with this could bring us to a question of how your work in general relates to the theme of the show, drawing from our histories, because of course there's so many meanings for what drawing could be, and we just talked about one in terms of the tattoo practice, which seems very corporeal but still has this drawing aspect to it. And I remember when we were talking about your work and thinking about which ones would be good to bring together for this exhibition, there was this one moment where you said something to the effect of, all my work is about drawing. And I thought maybe you could elaborate on what you meant by that.
Yeah, totally. That's a great ending to our talk. Yeah, we were having a discussion and you were curious about including a painting with the works that we were including. And I said, well, I mean, the painting is a drawing for me anyway. And all of my work is a form of drawing anyways. And so, and I actually do really believe in that, which was really confusing when I was teaching painting and drawing to my students. And I think that with works, it's great to be porous and to be fluid and to be multifarious when it comes to, how you identify with what you're making and what it is. And that, so sort of some of those delineations are really like irrelevant. But why I say that it's drawing is because I use the word draw as like this verb where I'm, kind of summoning memories and collaging in my head, memories and different thoughts. And for me, drawing is the most immediate way for me to get a thought out and to get an idea out. So whether that's, a quick scribble. Oh, that's my timer telling us to wrap it up. But yeah, so for me, drawing is so immediate in that it really informs everything that I do, whether it's, ceramics, tattoos, sculpture, music, painting, drawing, all of that still has within it the way that I approach drawing as this immediate, most direct way for me to have my thoughts be explored.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alice.
So I think, Fiona, we can...
I'm coming back on. yeah, I'm coming back. So thank you.
Pass it to the next person.
So much. Yeah, exactly. Now it's time for the next. So I'm going to bring Heather Igloliorte up, as well as Kablusiak. Okay. By way of a little introduction, Kablusiak is a multidisciplinary Inuvialuk artist and curator who uses Inuk ingenuity to create work in a variety of mediums. In all of their creative work, Kablusiak seeks to demystify Inuit art. Oh, hold on. Let's get you on here. Inuit art and create the space for Inuit-led representation of diverse aspects of Inuit cultures. So Kablusiak, thanks so much for being here. And Heather Igloliorte, Inuk Nunatsiavut, holds the Tier 1 University Research Chair in Circumpolar Indigenous Arts at Concordia University, where she is an associate professor in the Department of Art History. Igloliorte is part of the curatorial team for Inua, the inaugural exhibition at WAG. Oh, sorry.
I'm not the only one.
Not until the last word. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fiona. I mean, Kablusiak also on the curatorial team for Inua, but that's a great intro because, of course, we're also colleagues, and I have curated Kablusiak into a different group exhibition a couple of years ago called Among All These Tundras, where they included sculptural work in the exhibition. And I thought that would be a great place to start because Kablusiak is, of course, a multidisciplinary artist who also works in installation and stone sculpture and photography and felt wall hanging. So like lots and lots of media that come out of this history of modern Inuit art, like 1940s to the present Inuit art history that is probably most familiar to people. And of course, also a big part of the KUAG collection is their modern and contemporary Inuit art collection. And so I thought we could start by, after you introduce yourself, Kablusiak, to talk a little bit about how Inuit art history has been influencing your own practices. Because for me, as one of the few Inuit art historians, I often feel like the jokes are just for me. And like, though I've been looking at Kablusiak's work I just feel like it's, you know, like as someone who often feels like she is speaking back to a legacy of Inuit art being in the beginning, certainly brokered by and for Southern Canada. It is always delightful to see an Inuk artist who is really engaging with those histories. So over to you, Kablusiak.
Oh, thank you, Heather. Thanks everyone for joining. I see there's 33 participants. That's, wow, very cool. Uvanga Kablusiak apag mga tinga Arlen Carpenter ikahukmun ama mga tinga Holly Nasagalo at Carpenter tuktuyak tumun. Hi, my name is Kablusiak. My father is Arlen Carpenter. He's from Sax Harbor. My mom is Holly Nasagalo at Carpenter. She is from Tuktoyaktuk. I was born in Yellowknife and raised in Edmonton. So I'm like, sadly, mostly Albertan at this point, but yeah, currently living in Calgary, graduated from the drawing department at AU Arts in 2016. So I don't know, I think I just like have a special place for drawing in my guts. But yeah, thinking about like Inuit art history is so wild to me, because like to me, I grew up surrounded by Inuit art, right? Like I would just call it art, but you know, like carvings and paintings, and like my dad had a kuluk, like a really cute one, and he put his like business cards in there. So it's like, it was just like integrated into life, and I didn't really know that there was like such a insane Inuit art market, and it kind of just like blew me away. The first Inuit art book catalog that I remember getting was when I was at AU Arts, probably third or fourth year. They had like a book sale at the Illingworth Art Gallery, and I saw publication from Annie Pudigo about her drawings, and that just like, oh my god, it was like, you know, like losing your virginity, like that kind of like intensity. But yeah, I there's so much there in Inuit art history to talk about, and it's I always want to come, I come at it from a place of respect, you know, because it's literally, you know, my people and their history, and hopefully that comes across, and I'm not just like some shithead being like, hey, but I don't know if that answers your question, or I'm starting to ramble.
No, not at all. I think that there's a great love for all of the work that comes through, but just like also that like taking the sort of like reverence out of the question, and just really appreciating the artists as people who you share similarities with and interests and lives with. I think Annie would have loved that analogy to her work. You know, I grew up in Happy Valley Goose Bay. My dad's from Hopedale, and so that's like one coast of the Inuit regions of Canada, which is Inuit Nunga. And you're from the other side. You're from the western part of the Arctic, and so like my first experience with Inuit art, like catalogs, writing, this kind of thing, is that my parents had a subscription to Inuit Art Quarterly. And back when I was young and reading those things, and before I went to art school, a lot of it was very Nunavut centric, and it was like a particular kind of artwork. It was, you know, dancing bears and animal sculptures and prints and drawings. And that is, you know, the work that was being created from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s through the 90s, like when I was a high school student thinking about art school. So much of that work is just so incredible. And it just feels like, you know, for me, certainly, I felt like I couldn't engage with it because it was so huge and so big, and I was just like one little person. And so there's a series of drawings that, Fiona, could you flip to the like grid of drawings that Kablusiak made while they were in art school? Because I think that, you know, if I think back to myself from 20 years ago, being in school, and then where you were, you just came up with such a great, such an important kind of reaction to what in the text that I wrote for the essay I called the crushing weight of a very specific art history when you are like trying to find your way in the art world as an emerging artist. Do you want to talk about these pieces?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I made those during art school. I don't know. I was doing like really, I was trying to do like photorealism, drawing and painting, and, you know, realized that that is not the life for me, like technical wise, and also like time and energy. And I don't know how people have patience for that. So I was like, what is the opposite of like laboring over a canvas, and then, but also trying to get to the same, get to the point of the artwork, and just like a, you know, as fast as you could, like the Sharpie lid. But yeah, I think it's like, I love blending almost like a train of thought sort of texts, and pairing them with these little figures. Yeah, I made about, I don't know, probably over 100 drawings of these guys, and it was like very, very, very cathartic. And I'm even just like seeing them on the screen now, it's like, even formally, it looks really cool. But yeah, fun drawings to sort of just like explode the brain juice out onto paper as fast as possible.
They seem like cathartic in the terms of like the sort of urgency and simplicity with which they're drawn, as well as cathartic in the like, I'm just getting all of these, all of the feelings, and like the sort of racing thoughts are just coming out of my mind. The series is called Life is Okay Sometimes series. And so it's like to think about this body of work, and then, you know, what it is kind of in complement to, like, could you talk a little bit about how you see your drawing practice in relation to your other media practices? Because as far as I can tell, you kind of keep everything going at once, although you might do a little bit more in one area or another as you're working on a series.
When Marigold was talking about like everything being a drawing, I was like, yes, that is 1000% like where my mind is at. Like wall hangings is just like a drawing made out of felt. But yeah, same vibes as like, it's like my bread and butter that I go to first off. And I don't know, I try not to be like feeling too like, oh, I gotta covet this drawing because it's so perfect, but because that's sort of like the antithesis of what the point of the drawing is. But yeah, everything starts off as drawing pretty much.
Can we, do we have close-ups of the drawing on the left and the right of this screen? So this one I greatly enjoyed. Do you want to talk a little bit about this piece?
Yeah, Daima, like in our dialect is like, it kind of depends on the context, but it's pretty much like, that's all, or like stop or don't, but you know, like that's all, folks. And I, yeah, wanted to see what it was like to try to get that like waxy richness of the pencil crayons, and yeah, kind of branching out from the Sharpie and the paper. And the other new drawing.
Yes. Well, let me just say about this one, like you know,
yeah.
time it can also be like usually it's like at the end of a serious conversation, or like, you know, we're done talking about this now, we're ready to move on from this, or like that was we're like, we've ended today in a good place. And so to like turn it into the Looney Tunes, like time, you know, like, just to think about it as like moving into pop culture in a way that you do so well and so subversively. I thought it's like, I think that this is a piece that a lot of Inuit would really love. And then the last work, as we move into our last few minutes here, we can't go without talking about it. When I saw it, I immediately was like, oh, this is the Annie Poutigu reference. So for people who are not familiar with Annie Poutigu's work, she rose to fame and won the Sobey Award for a body of drawings that are probably those first ones that you saw, Kablusiak. That was a series of drawings that depicted the kind of vernacular everyday life, which I think is also a big theme in a lot of your work. And so, she had a drawing that, you know, my students certainly always love, called Watching Jerry Springer. And it's a girl like kind of lying around on the couch in her underwear, watching Jerry Springer on TV, and just thinking, like, making audiences think like, here are people up in the Arctic and just watching and wonder, like, and maybe saying, oh, is this what Southern culture is? Like, is this what's happening down there? Maybe I'm fine to stay up here in my client only community, is how I always read that work. And so when I saw this, I was like, oh, this is like the amplification of that.
Yeah. This, like, yeah, it started as like a little, I don't know, joke in my brain, but I was like, I got to see this out. I got to make this a real life drawing. Like, yeah.
It is just like the like the two friends sort of sitting, just watching
like,
this together,
making sure that their knees are not touching, because that would be gay and like,
like the sort of like awkwardness of saying like, let's get into watching this video, and then the reality of actually watching it, and the kind of I don't know, horror creeping in. I just I really appreciate what you're saying about having to do it once you start thinking about it. As a kind of final thought, like, what are you thinking about now that you are going to be bringing into reality in the future?
Future, gonna be sewing some parka covers.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yeah, like mesh, like tulle, like, yeah, sort of slutty. I'm excited.
There'll be like slutty parka covers that are also like a drawing.
Yeah. Totally.
Always great to talk to you, Kablusiak. Thanks, Sandra and Heather, Fiona, and everyone at Kuwait for inviting us to be a part of this. It's always a thrill to work with Kablusiak.
Oh, I feel the same way, Heather. Thank you for everything. Quite a 90.
Nakumi.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take you out of the spotlight, and I'll move us to our final dynamic duo. So we've got Jagdeep Raina. Oh, hold on. And it's not letting me spotlight you, Jagdeep. I think that's just because you don't have your camera on. And then Anna as well. Oh, it's just pin you. Okay. There we go, spotlight. Okay. So welcome to you both. So Jagdeep Raina was born in Guelph, Ontario. In his research-based practice, Raina utilizes the archive in order to explore historical memory. His work seeks to identify the residue left behind by the human touch and its restorative potential. So thanks so much, Jagdeep, for being here. And Anna Khimasia is an independent curator and educator currently based in New York. She focuses on contemporary art, performance, and alternative practices. In 2023, she will be teaching at both UCLA and Rutgers. So thanks and welcome, Anna, and I'll pass it to you.
Thank you for inviting us, Fiona, Heather, Sandra, everybody at UAG, and Jagdeep. It will be nice to actually talk to you, maybe face to face. I don't know. I'm not seeing you, but that's fine. So I wanted to start. Are you there, Jagdeep?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
Sorry, I'm just walking back from work, so sorry.
Okay, all good. So I wanted to start by talking about content. And in two of the works that are in the show, you depict a Sikh temple. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that site and why it might be important to you personally and to the Sikh community historically.
Yeah, so first I just want to say thank you, Anna, and thank you, Sandra, for inviting me for the show. I am speaking from the lands of the Arakaba Nashak, Tapilam, Quechan, and the Sanabana of the Tonkawa tribe and Karankawa nations, also known as a very hot and humid Houston, Texas. So that's where I'm speaking from. I've been thinking a lot about the works that you selected, Anna, for this exhibition, and I think I wanted to read a quote from the book, The Poetics of Space, and it says, "The house, as I see it, is sort of an airy structure that moves about on the breath of time. It really is open to the wind of another time. It seems as though it could greet us every day of our lives in order to give us confidence in life." And I've been thinking a lot about kind of this conceptual idea of what a house looks like, the architectural surroundings of it, the way it's built, what it represents, what it means, particularly what it means to kind of study or examine a house that's no longer gone and that only kind of exists in a kind of a fragmented manner. And that was kind of the initial kind of conceptual framework that I was thinking a lot about when making those early drawings of looking at kind of the architectural landscape of these like Sikh temples. And, you know, in many ways, they're kind of these complex loaded sites, particularly the ones that I was drawing because they no longer exist and they were torn down in the 60s and early 70s. And, you know, it was a space of a really kind of intersectional community. It was East Asians and South Asians and, you know, indigenous communities. And it was a space that became a home for like the Punjabi Sikh communities primarily, but in its kind of activist kind of structuring, it was very much more fluid and more of a radical space. And going there now, that structure is gone. And you just have these really kind of luxury condos that are there. It's in an area in Kitsilano, which is a quite expensive area in Vancouver. So the site was torn down many years before I was even born in the late 60s, early 70s. And I was interested in resurrecting that site and thinking a lot about, I don't know, this idea of that home and thinking about kind of a conceptual framework of home and what it means and, you know, what it means to visit a site that, you know, came from a racialized group who built it, but also a racialized group that were settlers in that kind of complicated history. And, you know, obviously the significance of that place no longer being there and being in an area of Canada that's one of the most expensive areas in the country. So I think the erasure of history and how to kind of resurrect the past through the act of drawing was something that I was kind of investigating. And I was thinking a lot about lots of different kinds of artists, Canadian artists, international artists. One artist that I was thinking a lot about that I would share is Toba Kaduri. She's an artist from Iraq, but she grew up in Australia and now lives in LA. And she also has done these really beautiful drawings where she coats the paper in wax. And these are like, almost like these kind of architectural ruins of cities in Baghdad, like structures in Baghdad and structures across Iraq. And so she was someone I was looking at. I was thinking a lot about the history of architecture. I was thinking a lot about the materiality of paper. The artist Zarina, who's a Pakistani artist who lived in New York for many years, and these kinds of spaces of architecture. So that was kind of the initial foray into making that drawing. It was kind of this conceptual research and then studying the artists who came before me and after me, how to kind of put this history together and translate it onto paper.
Yeah, you touched on so many things there. Like at first, it makes me think about your interest in poetry and drawing as well. Something that I know you explore in your animations. And maybe you can talk about your relationship with poetry.
Yeah, so I did a major in English literature for my undergrad. And I always took creative writing classes. I took a creative writing seminar all throughout grad school. So writing is something that kind of keeps following me. And it's something that I'm trying to kind of see kind of coexist without a hierarchy alongside having a visual arts practice. And so, you know, there's a long history of many contemporary artists who have a writing practice and also writers who have a visual art practice. So kind of thinking a lot about the exchange between writing and between visual art, particularly between drawing, is something that has been a skill set that I've just been trying to continue to work on. And, you know, poetry in particular, there's so many poets that I look at, contemporary poets, more historic poets. And yeah, I try to really see them as coexisting alongside one another.
Yeah, and your animations, I mean, certainly speak to that. And do you think that, like, it seems that you're working on animation more and more, and I wonder if that has changed your drawing practice at all?
I think it's made it, yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's made me be more mindful of kind of, I think when you're making a drawing, there's such an immediacy to it. There's a sense of speed and there's a sense of pushing back against wanting to work on something slowly. Like there's such the immediacy and the speed that one can get with drawing can be really seductive at times. But I think with the animation, it's so much slower, particularly stop motion animation, because you have to do a mark and then take a picture and then take a mark and take a picture. And it takes hours and hours and hours. And so it's kind of changed my relationship with time, where it's made me think more about slowing down and what does it look like to slow down when investigating a drawing practice.
Oh, interesting. Because you also, I mean, that's also interesting in thinking about your embroideries, which are also, I imagine, time consuming, not included in this show, but you do embroidery. And I think that must be almost meditative too, this idea of slowing down.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an interesting way to kind of experiment with thinking a lot about longevity, thinking a lot about duration. What does it mean to kind of slow down in a culture that seems to be kind of addicted to speed? So those are some things that I've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, and I wanted to just jump back to this idea of the archive, because I know you do a lot of archival research. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you sort of conceptualize the archive and also how you use and engage with archives.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can focus on particularly the works for the show. So I was doing a lot of research at the City of Vancouver Archives and the Vancouver Public Library Archives, kind of going through their material of, mainly photographs, and thinking a lot about how to translate kind of this historical artifact into something that's not really static or something that's not really fixed, but something that is almost coming to life in a way that's pushing back against kind of the hierarchical nature of time. I think I've been thinking a lot about time, not so much as something that's linear, which we all kind of can feel like it really isn't, but more as something that feels like a spiral, like falling out of focus, then coming back into focus and falling out of focus. You know, some artists who have made me think a lot about that, in particular to the drawing practice, is Chitra Ganesh, Kara Walker, Glenn Ligon. So that for me is kind of at the root of exploring the archive, something that's not really fixed or not really static. And also they're in many ways like kind of violent spaces because they're constructed, so many archives, particularly, in institutions across North America, are constructed from a very, from like a hierarchical lens. Like it was a very specific type of person who could build these archives. I just think about the City of Vancouver archives. Like, there's photos of, that was uncovering of, young South Asian women in the 1940s and 50s, and nobody knew who those people were in the photos, and there were, nobody knew. So it just said, 1949 with a question mark, and then identified women, or identified people. Whereas or at that time it wasn't even women. It would be like the kind of the derogatory term of Hindu, like HINDOO. And then you go to an archive at the Vancouver Public Library, say maybe it's like of a Caucasian community. It's like the Smith family from this town and their 4 kids. And so it's just like they're constructed in a way, particularly in the past, that there was kind of almost like a slow violence where a lot, they're messy and they're not it's like these details of these people are not really, they're missing. And so I think a lot about what it means to resurrect history that's quite violent in many ways, and how to push back against that. And I think a lot about this, another quote that I wanted to share for today's talk, which is, I mentioned Kara Walker earlier, and she says this quote, she says, "I think it's very important to look back. I don't think we do it often enough. I think sometimes looking back leads to a kind of depression and status, which isn't good, but looking forward without any kind of deep historical feeling of connectedness, that's not good either." So I think a lot about that quote in reference to my relationship with the archive.
Yeah, and I think the way that you talk about it in terms of falling in and out of focus is a nice way of thinking about it. Like I always think about archives of what's not contained in them, like who controls them, obviously what's contained within an archive, but also what's not contained within an archive. And I think that you do a nice job of thinking about that in terms of like bringing into focus or looking for those moments that are out of focus or are not contained too. And I think that comes through in your work in terms of like the everyday and the monument or the monumental, like turning the sort of architectural Sikh temple into something that is a drawing, like a humble drawing, if you will, and then turning these what looked like pamphlets or everyday sort of objects contained in the archive into more monumental drawings. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, of sort of like the tension, I guess, between grand narratives and personal narratives, and maybe the monument and the everyday.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about it in terms of, I think, yeah, this idea of resurrection, like, you know, what, taking the monumental and the everyday and kind of giving it historical significance is something that I'm really interested in. Particularly, you know, I think a lot about maybe another series of drawings I had once done of this kind of really famous bodega in New York City, and called the Punjabi Deli, and you know, it's kind of in a part of New York City, the Lower East Side, East Village, that's, you know, quite gentrified now. But at the time it opened in the early 90s, it was, you know, it was a very different neighborhood, and you know, it was a space for taxi drivers to hang out and just like have a bite to eat while working like 14-hour, 16-hour, 17-hour shifts. And I started making these drawings of that space and thinking a lot about, you know, for me, like the Punjabi Deli deserves to have just as much of a historical importance as like Times Square, Statue of Liberty, Central Park, but it's not going to have any of its permanence because, you know, it might disappear in the next 5 to 10 years. And so I'm thinking a lot about that, you know, the hierarchical ways in which we structure monuments, and, you know, what
Exactly.
what is deemed important and what's deemed forgotten, and then in between that, and who, yeah, exactly, yeah, and the space in between, right?
Exactly. And I think that, you know, we've been thinking about this a lot, especially since Black Lives Matter became so prominent in the last few years, of sort of what these monuments symbolize and what they memorialize and whose memories. And so, yeah, I think the bodega in New York City is a really nice example of that, you know, of memorializing it, the everyday experience.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think I think we're almost at 4. So I'm going to close up there. Thank you, Jagdeep.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you both. So Anna, I'm going to keep you up there, and then I'm going to ask the other artists and curators to turn on their video. And if folks in the audience want to ask any questions, please, yeah, raise your hand or just type it into the chat. I like that there seemed to be some resonances across the artists. And, oh yeah, I really related to that.
I have a question for Marigold.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask him?
Of course, yeah.
Marigold, I'm really interested in this idea of like the shapeshifter. And I was curious if in your work, is the shapeshifter always between, or are they kind of in one state or another, or are they always kind of caught in this in-between shifting, as you will?
Mm-hmm. So thank you so much, Anna, for the question. In the mythology of this particular folkloric character, they are not always in a state of transition. They're always in this one state or another. And there's always like a very specific time where they transform. And so that's interesting to me. But for the purposes of what I do, and when I work with this particular folkloric character, what I do is I always keep the figure in transition. So it's quite a different, there's foundations from where it originates. And then in my work, because I reconfigure this mythology, the state of always being in flux is really what is most important to me and in my work. And because I'm speaking a lot about like diaspora and experiences like that, I feel like you're like, as a POC person, I feel like I'm always sort of in a state of flux. I'm always in a state of sort of like not in one place or in the other, and also in the state of constant code switching all the time. So this is sort of a lot of where the whole idea of like multiple self, fragmenting selfhoods, all of that really just comes from this idea of, maybe code switching is a part of shapeshifting, which is something that, we experience quite often, and we don't even really pick that apart or analyze, but it is an exhausting part of being a person of color. And it's almost like an expected part of being a person of color. And so all of these things are really factored into this idea of this shapeshifter, and that shapeshifting is part of survival.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Are there other questions?
I'd like to ask Kablusiak about their use of Garfield, which I've been very curious about for a long time. And I'm wondering if you could tell me, what is the appeal of Garfield for you, and why did you choose to work with Garfield in your work?
I love this question. For me, Garfield is really, it could be any pop culture thing. It could be like Betty Boop. It could be whatever. I just grew up with Garfield comics in my parents' apartment, just like kind of always around. But it's not even about Garfield, really. It's just the idea that anything is Inuit art if an Inuk makes it. So it's like, yeah, this is like an Inuk Garfield because I made it. But yeah, it's sort of me trying to poke fun and trying to wriggle out some freedom, like some artistic freedom with thinking about what Inuit art is supposed to look like, or has historically looked like, or works that have been put on a pedestal. So I'm putting Garfield on my pedestal.
I always thought though, like, that there's more to it, because Garfield is more of a vibe, right? Like Betty Boop is existing on one plate, and Garfield has like existential crises and is grumpy and like has, he's bringing a little bit more attitude to the table, I think, which is what makes him kind of fun. Because I think that, also there's that stereotype of Inuit as like happy-go-lucky kind of people, that sort of old primitivist idea. And so like I feel injecting Garfield is like injecting a different kind of energy into Inuit art.
Yeah, he's definitely a vibe.
I had a question for the curators. I wonder if any or all of you could talk about just the process of contacting the artist, and how was it to work together and selecting the work? Were there any kind of factors that came into play? I think it was quite an open ask. There's artists that you're really interested in who have a drawing based practice. So where do you go from there? Maybe Alice?
Yeah, I think I wanted to include so much more of Marigold's work, but then it became sort of a more pragmatic thing. And so it was really interesting for me to think through, I think that the diasporic dimension, or the POC dimension, that sort of edge that was there all the time, that's kind of experience that sort of goes with this figure of the Ashwang, who and you were saying, I know you were saying that it's a shapeshifter, but that there's this sort of hard raw edge to it. And I just was thinking, Jagdeep, when you were talking about the slow violence, that it's sort of always there in the background, and we want to keep it at bay, but keep it close and keep an eye on it, and over time, how to manage it and live alongside with this history, right? These kinds of histories. And I might be a little vague, but I think I'm just blown away by just all of the work that's come together, not just amongst the six of us, but like with the other artists and curators too. So I'm just really thrilled. But maybe Marigold, if you like, we could bring you in too to talk about that edge. You talked about it a little bit, but I think there was always that nagging, how will this present itself? How will people have access to those symbols, to those cultural references, right? And how much information do we need to give to provide them? And what are we assuming about our audiences when we're giving so much information or concerning about cultural background and cultural references, right? So this is push and pull. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I just will quickly address what you're saying. I think like when it comes to sort of like what my work is always about, I mean, there's so much there, and is why I've been working with these themes for years. And also they're so relevant, like, the edge that maybe you're talking about, I think becomes more and more relevant every year, the more that we have language to describe and to speak about our experiences. Like, I feel like that is becoming easier and easier in some ways to describe. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think like when it comes to the work that you selected and the process of your selection for my work, I think like it wasn't that difficult for me because I knew the themes that ran through them. And I think maybe for you, it was harder because you just really there's so many different angles to approach it. But yeah, that was the experience working with you, and I had a great time. So thank you, Alice. And yeah, it was a great partnership and a really interesting process, and really appreciated the ability to make something new for the show as well. So thank you.
That's true. That's true. I'm really glad that we landed on the large tattoo vinyl. So that was really wonderful. Wonderful to work with Marigold too. So.
Great, thank you. Anna or Heather, do you want to speak to that at all?
Was that a point at me, Heather? So I guess for me, drawing was kind of an interesting thing because it's not something I usually curate. So I was like, drawing, oh, okay. But in the same way, I'm always very interested in representing underrepresented voices and other histories. And so I thought a lot about like this drawing on our history. And I thought, no, drawing on our histories. And so how do we weave those threads, and what different histories can we bring together in this show? So I looked at, and then I did some studio visits and saw Jagdeep's work, and then talked to Jagdeep about his interest in archives and narratives, and these grand narratives versus personal histories. The same idea of, the bodega in New York City, of taking something that is an everyday experience and turning that into something that is more monumental or memorializes those experiences. So, I mean, I think the work just spoke to me too. Like, I just think it's very smart work, and I think it's very interesting, and I think it's very important work for Canada too, to think about our histories. And just on a personal note, for a long time, I thought when I was a kid, I learned about the Kanagata Maru incident, where the Sikh boat is come in, I think it's 1917, to Canada, and they weren't allowed to get off the boat. And I also am half Indian, and so had come to Canada as an immigrant. So it just resonated too on that level for me, of just my own sort of remembrance of that incident. And there was a play, and then just how it kind of resonated in my own world, and thinking about South Asian histories in Canada, I guess. Jagdeep, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
No, I just want to say, yeah, like, Anna, it was so cool to work with you. And it's funny, we haven't even met yet in person, but it's been amazing to just like have these amazing, I mean, you're somebody who I kind of at this point consider like a mentor and a friend, and I've just really valued our conversations, and I always learn so much. I always have like a notebook with me. I'm like taking notes, I'm like, okay, I need to do this, I need to read that, I need to look at this artist. So it's been really amazing.
We've had some great conversations.
Yeah,
one day we will.
So one day, yeah. So I'm just really grateful. And also I'm super grateful to all the other artists too. It's amazing I've learned so much from everybody speaking here today, and all the other artists, and just the works look so beautiful. And I'm really grateful and honored to be in such amazing company. So thank you.
Thank you.
Love that.
That's awesome. You know, I hear there are so many resonances between Marigold and Jagdeep and Kablusiak's work, and how we're all, like what Jagdeep was saying earlier around, you know, sort of needing to engage with the past in order to move to the future, but not wanting to be kind of tied down by the weight of that history. And when Kablusiak and I were talking about this, you know, we started off talking about the weight of art history on their shoulders, and then at the end of our conversation, they made a joke that instead of it being a weight, it had become like a weighted blanket. So like the comfort of that, but a big part of that for Kablusiak, what we were talking about is that you were saying that, you know, you sort of gave yourself permission to mess around with the history and to make it your own and to do whatever you wanted with it. And so when Sandra invited me, we had a conversation, because Sandra is also a Kablusiak mega fan, in addition to being a Gail Kabluna mega fan. And so we talked about the different bodies of works that Kablusiak had, but I don't know if anybody got to see the Sobi show where Kablusiak was a finalist, but you know, there was this incredible body of photographic work, but there was also just this one drawing in the same simple line drawing. You know, it's like the simple drawing that is actually just makes you think so complexly around what is happening. And like, you know, it really is mastery to be able to convey so much with just one little line. And it was a huge, like 12-foot tall, probably, drawing on the wall of one of these sort of genderless figures that was just like sort of posed in a prayer form saying, "Thank you, Mr. Sobi," and then dollars with wings flying around them. And so it's like, and it's like, you know, in that moment, I was just like, oh, they're such a genius, because it is tongue-in-cheek, it is satire, but it is also like, we are also grateful to the Sobis for being one of the only billionaires in the country who are actually supporting the arts and giving back, and kept expanding the award. And so the Sobi Foundation, you know, they are actually contributing critically to emerging artists. And I remember talking to Rob Sobi, and he said, you know, we thought that when we did it, that all the others would kind of follow suit, and that there would be more support for culture in the country. And so, like, you know, there's the tension between like the needing support from organizations, cultural foundations, and so on, and having art sort of not being recognized in the same kind of platform as other work, but then also the gratitude and that being kind of mixed in with the satire and the irony of being in that position. Like, it's all happening at once. And so I really appreciate how Kablusiak does that. And can I also just say, Maria von Finkenstein is on this call, and I know this is weird, but I haven't seen her since the day, I think, that she retired from the Museum of Civilization, which is now the Museum of History. And I just want to give her a shout out, because she was so kind and generous to me when I was a grad student and working at the CUAG for Sandra, you know, 15, 20 years ago, whatever that was, and actually gave me her, as she was retiring, gave me her entire library of Inuit art history books. And so a lot of where all of that comes from for me, and in fact, even gave me the text that inspired my critical look at the foundations of Inuit art and what it was kind of envisioned to be by some of the cultural brokers who were in power, and then how Inuit really took Inuit art and moved it in their own direction. And so I just wanted to say hi. It's so nice to see you on this call, and I'm just it's really awesome. Thanks, Maria.
Oh, thank you. Let's see if Maria, oh yeah, she's unmuted. Okay, well, I'll wrap it up there, though I won't end it kind of immediately. But I'm just going to put some links in the chat, just information about the exhibition, if you'd like to come visit it, and then our next event for the show is an in-person version of this with all the local artists. So on April 4th. So if you're in town, I hope you can make it out. But thank you so much, Anna, Marigold, Alice, Heather, Kablusiak, and Jagdeep. I so appreciate the time you've spent here and the reflections you've given. So thanks, everyone. Round of applause.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.